So I'd like to welcome you all to the Conditions for Creativity to Flourish with Garfield Jeannie Newman. It's always great to see people from all over Ontario participating in professional development through OTF Connects. And you're in for a busy and amazing evening with Garfield. So I'm going to turn it over to Garfield. Thank you.
Thank you. And I hope everyone can hear me okay. If I could just maybe get a few people just to click on that happy face just under your name. That will tell me that I'm heard okay. Wonderful. I see some happy faces. Great. I'm curious, and this isn't my first slide. I'm going to ad-libbing a little bit. Could a few of you just share with me, I mean, we had a wonderful sign-up and a great turnout this evening. Could I just get a few thoughts on why the topic seems to have such appeal? So what is it about the topic? Is it general interest? Is it a direction or a move in your board? Is it engaging students? What motivated you to sign up for this evening? So if we could I'm just going to wait for 30 seconds, 45 seconds, and just see if you could throw some thoughts. So engagement, interest, connecting to the 21st century, great. Okay, so to something in the spring, imagination, to avoid worksheets. So Melanie, I'm going to, you've kind of started us in your comment about the taking away opportunities for creativity. So I want to start on my continuum that you see here, and someone has started us off with a happy face. If you could respond, and that's a wonderful way to do it if you want to place a happy face, or you can do it in the chat. Do you think schools, when children come to school, are they more likely to, well, you can see my question, is school more likely to enhance or inhibit creativity? Does it get in the way, or does it help it flourish? And I understand, and you can add if you want to add to the window, that your answer could vary, I suppose, depending on grade. It could vary depending on subject area or teacher. So if you want to qualify and add a note, that would be great. So far, I'm not seeing, we're leaning on the wrong side of the scale here for what I think we need in schools. Well, we're getting few more, okay. Caitlin, can I get you to expand just a little bit on depends? Depends on what? If you could just add a little bit to that. And Melanie, that's an interesting that you saw it disappear in elementary. Any thoughts or ideas as to why it disappeared or what caused it to decline in elementary? Okay, so the funding, I'm assuming that's kind of arts funding. It's hard to keep up with these comments. I want to, there's a comment that just flew past me, and I want to see if I can find it. Someone was saying, because it's, I think, a really important comment. Alexis, create and develop out-of-the-box thinking, necessary in all life. I really want to pick up on that. So as we look this evening, like, creativity not isolated to, an hour for Genius Hour or the arts, but how do we make creativity as important as anything else in school? That's just part of it. I want to explore that with you a little bit. And I'm seeing some of the issues coming up, time, covering curriculum, and so on. So we'll start to dig into this. I'm going to ask you, and I'm going to see if we can set this up as a vote. So I've got 4 options for you, because we're going to be talking then about thinking, and I'll come back to that in a moment. But some of you have been to sessions on critical thinking. Lots of schools are working in critical thinking. What is the relationship? Which of these best represents the relationship between critical thinking and creativity? So I don't know if it's possible if we can set up A, B, C, D, and people can vote. If we could, that would be wonderful. But would you say it's A?
Yes, A, B, C, D?
Yes, that would be wonderful. Thank you. So A, we're suggesting that there is no relationship. There's separate ways of thinking. They're distinct ways of thinking. B, we're suggesting that they share some things in common, but in some ways are distinct. So we've got the vote tally up there. If you're going to pick C, then you're saying that one is a subset of the other. And I am going to come back to people who vote for C and ask which one is the purple and which one is the orange. Or you could say, I don't think any of these properly capture the relationship. And then you would go with D and offer another alternative. Or if you're just saying, I don't know, but I don't think any of the 3 sufficiently do it, then vote for D. So if you could vote or place it on the screen, either works for me, just to get a sense, how do we see the relationship between critical thinking and creativity? Okay, wonderful. So I've got I think a few votes for D, lots in B, and a few in C. So we're going to start unpacking this a little bit, and we'll come back to this. I did see some comments around assessment, and I've also looked at the number of slides I set up for tonight and thought, what was I thinking? So hopefully we'll get through a good chunk of them. One of the things I want you to keep in mind is one of the founders of the Critical Thinking Consortium, I'm just going to put her name in the box. Her name's Sharon Balin, and Sharon's doctoral thesis was called Achieving Extraordinary Ends, an essay on creativity. So I'm just typing that in. And the premise, one of the premises within her thesis was that you can assess creativity. We need to remember that the root word of creative is to create, and you always create with purpose and audience in mind. That whether the purpose or audience is self, others, but we always create with purpose and audience, and therefore we can assess creativity through the lens of how successfully it meets the intended purpose and reaches the intended audience. And I would suggest to you that we need to be very careful. If we presume we can't assess it, then it won't be valued, and we will undermine our own desire to infuse more creativity. We'll come back to that. I want to add a little bit to that, but let me just for a moment explore a little bit of this issue. And here's another possible alternative, and I'll explain this. You know, does this work? And you can put it a yes or no, but this idea of a yin yang, does this work a little bit where elements of critical and creative kind of bleed into each other, and the dots in the yin yang represent that in the creative there's always an element of critical, and within the critical there's always an element of the creative, so that the two are present in each other and they kind of bleed together. Does that work? I've had some people say they don't think you can capture the relationship in a two-dimensional image, that it really needs to be. I've had some say it's more like a DNA strand, that they're weaving together and so on. And Melanie, an interesting question. So what does this look like? And this is what I'm hoping to delve into tonight. What does this look like in practice? And how do we, and I want to try to understand this on a couple of levels. One is, what is the neuroscience telling us about creativity? What's happening in the brain? And so that we can start to form ideas that align to what the research is saying. And what are the practical, I'm really hoping we move into the practical strategies. So how do we do this each day? So I'm going to start defining a little bit more, or try to bring a lens to this. What does it mean to think creatively? And I kind of already said this a little bit, but notice you can see on the slide here that thinking creatively is not undisciplined brainstorming. It's targeted, it's purposeful, it's contextualized. As I said, you create with a purpose and audience. So creativity is not kind of meaningless, and it's the production, notice at the bottom there, of something both novel and useful. And we're going to come back to that in a moment. I'm just going to pause and share a story with you. About half a dozen years ago or so, I was doing a keynote talk at an arts conference in North Carolina, and I went up on stage and I said to launch my talk, there's no such thing as creative thinking. And remember, this was an arts conference of about 300 teachers, and you could kind of hear the collective gasp as I declared that there's no such thing as creative thinking. And I said to them, hear me out before you lynch me. I want you to think about this. Let me ask just before I go on, how many of you, and just give me a thumbs up or not, how many of you have heard in the past about right brain, left brain? Is that a commonly, usually in the 80s, there's a lot of talk about, left brain is logical, right brain not, so on. Lily, do you have a comment, or was that just a yes, a thumbs up? Okay, perfect. So all researchers in the field of creativity have rejected the notion of right brain, left brain. They're simply not. It makes no sense in terms of the neuroscience and what we understand of the brain. What we do know is in the brains of geniuses, and I'm going to come back to. I want to come back to the creative genius. We do know that geniuses typically have a thicker corpus callosum. That's the bundle of nerves that connects the right and left side of the brain, and that they have stronger interhemispheric connections. So we do know that kind of playing across, like the more you use the whole brain, the deeper the thinking. And by the way, if any of you have young children in dance, modern dance is one of the best things we can do to promote brain growth, because when children listen to, they have to listen, process the music, move to the music. It's firing all parts of the brain, and that's actually what's really powerful. It's not right or left, but the interhemispheric connections. Now, moving from that, let me go back to my, when I kind of bothered people by saying that there's no such thing as creative thinking. What I meant by that is if we hooked you up to an MRI scan, and we had you do tasks that are generally considered to be creative. We engaged you in tasks that invite creativity. You will not see a particular part of the brain light up. So when I say there's no such thing as creative thinking, what I'm saying is there is no single part of the brain dedicated to creativity. That's the myth. In fact, the part of the brain that lights up when you're engaged in creative exercises is the frontal lobes of the brain. And the frontal lobes are the executive functioning of the brain, where we make thoughtful decisions. So what I'm saying to you is whether I gave you a complex math problem, something to think, something to analyze, or what you might deem to be creative, your same part of the brain lights up. And what this is leading us to understand is that creativity is simply quality thinking. It's good thinking. And what I said to the audience is we need to be careful. Too often, creative is seen to be, critical is logical, sequential. It's seen to have more rigor. And creative is seen to be a bit fluffier and not as rigorous. And if we can't assess it, it's not as valued as much. And my message to both you this evening and to the people at that conference is that creativity is as equally rigorous and as equally important as critical thinking, and we need to stop seeing it as the poor second cousin to critical thinking. And to do that, we have to understand it's at the core of good, rich thinking. So much so that at one point we have considered, should the Critical Thinking Consortium be renamed? Should we be really focused on quality thinking? And our board of directors didn't really like that suggestion after 25 years. But maybe what we should be thinking about in schools isn't critical thinking and creative thinking. Are we engaging kids in quality thinking? And we would argue that quality thinking has 3 dimensions. Those dimensions we are now coming to see, there's a critical dimension, a creative dimension, and we also know that creativity flourishes in a collaborative environment. So good thinking, and you'll see this all over global competencies and everywhere else, that quality thinking, instead of seeing it as having different ways of thinking, we see it as having different dimensions, a critical dimension, a creative dimension, and a collaborative dimension. And ideally, we want these playing together in our classrooms. And by the way, I would argue these are as important in our math and science classrooms as they are in our arts classrooms. So we're going to explore this a little bit, and it'll come together as we work through. This is the criteria. So I'm trying to keep up with comments as well. Interesting. We'll try to touch on the frontal lobe issue with ADHD and the problem. But let me just touch on this piece. Virtually all researchers in the field of creativity agree on these 3 core criteria for something to be creative. But creativity, notice at the root, as I said before, of creative is to create. So one of the criteria is something has to be produced. That we typically don't ascribe or describe someone as being very creative if they have interesting ideas, but they never act on those ideas. So creative, to be creative is to produce something, to create. By the way, that could be a theory, it could be a work of art, it could be an invention, but there's something else. If you simply have ideas that pop in and out of your head, but you never act on them, we tend not to ascribe creativity to that. Secondly, the creation needs to be novel. So someone who can replicate a work of art, like do a forgery that is just undetectable from the original, we would say is very technically skilled, but we wouldn't say that they're creative. They didn't create something new. Natasha, in a similar way with ideas, that to some degree that the idea, you put a twist on the idea. By the way, recognizing that creativity is profoundly collaborative and that everything is building off, unless you're present at the Big Bang Theory, unless you're present when the Big Bang occurred, everything is a derivative of something else. We all build off of something else. The third criteria, though, is that your creation adds value. So if I come up with a new idea that's unique, and I actually try it out, I do something with it, but it doesn't work, you wouldn't describe me as creative. Let me give you a quick example. A number of years ago, I thought I would invent a new culinary delicacy. I thought, why don't we make grilled peanut butter sandwiches and dip them in honey instead of ketchup? What if we had grilled peanut butter? So I did it. I tried to create a grilled peanut butter sandwich. So something was produced. I think it was novel. I don't think I've seen a lot of people do grilled peanut butter sandwiches. It did not add value. What I produced was a hot mess. What I should have realized, and I'm sure chefs would have told me, when you grill cheese, it becomes nice and gooey and holds together. When you grill peanut butter, it runs right out of the bread. So it did not work at all. So what I'm saying here is I had an idea. I tried out my idea. My idea was somewhat unique, at least to me, but it did not add value. It didn't work. Now, if I had gone back and revised and tried, you might say, good point, too much sugar. Now, Natasha, toasted peanut butter. See, I threw them in the pan, tried to flip them. Anyway, big hot mess. I'm sure many of us have at times had ideas that seemed good in the idea phase, but when we tried it, it didn't work so well. And we don't kind of go down into the history books as a creative genius when our ideas didn't work. So these are 3 things that generally creativity. By the way, last year, for any of you teaching history in the intermediate or high school grades, the Métis Nation in Canada a couple of years ago had a contest to see who could write an anthem for the Métis Nation. They had a contest to see who could come up with it. So people would produce songs. They would create something. If their song sounded pretty much like another anthem, we would not call it creative. If it was really novel, we would then say, does it work as an anthem? Does it reflect the pride of the Métis people? Does it musically and lyrically work well? It has to add value. So when we get into working with children, remember creativity, we create invitations, they test, they refine, and they're creative when they can produce something novel or unique. Now, I want to just bridge this just for a moment. A lot of the work I do is around critical thinking, and some of you will have seen me speak on sustained inquiry. And so a lot of the work is how do we engage kids in deep, rich thinking on important issues that they get to think about over time, that we launch the learning, and we delve into it. What I want to dig into, though, is when we add creativity to this. Now, sorry, is the question how are critical thinking and sustained inquiry different? Is that the question? Okay, let me just comment on that for a moment then. Critical thinking I can do, if I just back it up like this, critical thinking I can do in a single lesson. I could ask a question, provide some evidence, have kids read, do some research, and they could respond. It could be done in a 40-minute lesson. I can have a different critical thinking question every day. Sustained inquiry, and the sustained is the key here, is when we ask students to dig into a question and think about it over time. Let me give you a quick example of a critical thinking task that was sustained inquiry. So this was a grade 9 science, and if you know Guardians of the Galaxy, there's a character called Groot, and the children are asked the first day, this is our launch, is Groot more plant or animal? Okay, so that was the question. Kids, the very first day, using a dashboard, had to lean, would you say Groot is mostly plant-like, more plant-like than animal, more animal than plant, or mostly animal? Notice this question's asked the first day. The kids take a position. They may or may not be able to defend why, but that's what they're leaning towards. Each day, as they learned about different parts of the body system, organ systems, and so on, and they think about Groot, they might refine or revise their thinking, and over time, they would be able to build a more and more convincing answer to support. And by the way, they may shift their thinking, but they're building. So that's what I mean by sustained inquiry, is that we've got a critical thinking question that gets unpacked over a few weeks, or certainly several lessons. So that's critical thinking, but sustained for deep learning. And then we will look at, so how do we add creativity to how students might share their learning, explore, and so on? And I would argue this is where we really get into deep learning. We get into deep learning when kids are thinking critically about assessing evidence in response to a question over time and being able to think in unique and innovative ways about how they might share that learning, how they might extend that learning, and so on. So my argument this evening is going to be critical thinking is great, but I think we get deeper if we do it in a sustained way over time, and I think we get at the richness of it when kids have the opportunity to try ideas, to test ideas, to play with ideas, and that's where the creative part comes in. So that's kind of where I want to go. Now, I want to just touch on, and by the way, the slide I'm showing you now, this is not my work. This is Rex Young. If you check it, Rex Young is a neuroscientist at the University of Albuquerque in New Mexico, and his specialty is the neuroscience of creativity. So Rex has been, and at the conference I spoke about earlier, Rex did the first keynote, I did the second, so we were back-to-back keynotes on creativity. And Rex is that person who brings people in and hooks them up to MRIs and engages them in creative activities and watches what's going on in the brain. His interest is what's happening in the brain as we engage in creative activities. And my talk this evening is about creating the conditions. So I want you to, first of all, share with you, and I'll unpack these a little bit more in a moment. Rex talks about 4 stages of the creative process. There's the preparation, incubation, illumination, and verification phase. Now, let's just dig into those just a wee bit. The preparation phase, and let me just double check, but Melanie, this PowerPoint can be shared with people, can it? Posted somewhere in some way?
Yes and no. If it's in a place like an online space, we can.
So, well, I can certainly, if anyone needs it, I can send. What I just want to get at is some of these slides have a lot of content on them, and as we go through them, yeah, screenshot them. If I can send it to you, PDF them, whatever, I'm happy to do it.
And the recording will be available tomorrow.
Perfect.
Yeah.
So if we go too quickly, just because of time, I just want you to know that we'll make sure you can get it somehow. Because I'm just going to summarize quickly so we don't run out of time. So the preparation phase, and by the way, this is speaking from what we know from the neuroscience in creativity. The preparation phase, you can see, you cannot be creative in a field you know nothing about. This is one of the myths that we can just tell kids to come up with a creative idea. The greatest creative ideas are generated by people who have a deep understanding in the field in which they're working. So if I said to someone who has no dance training, I want you to choreograph a dance that will capture this emotion in a powerful way, they're going to struggle a lot more. If I want people to innovate in science, then you need to know some science. Notice when I said to you my peanut butter example, my older son is a chef. If I had his culinary training, I probably would have known before I started that these ingredients don't mix well, or these are the properties of the ingredients, and so on. So part of being creative is developing a knowledge base in the field in which you want to innovate. And we need to help students understand that creative ideas don't just come out of thin air. That creativity, by the way, this is why I said to you earlier, creativity should be seen as rigorous as critical thinking and should be valued as much. Because creative people are often very knowledgeable in the field. They just think differently about that information. You see at the bottom the dispositions we often see in creative people. Nonconformist, unconventional, more openness to trying new ideas, more cognitively flexible, more willing to take risks. But it's not less informed. They are as richly informed. So that's the prepare. The incubation process is allowing the unconscious, as you're wandering about, you're doing some things, and ideas jump into your head. So I've been learning about, I've been thinking about. Notice the second point here, that often you could be busy doing other things, playing games, doing dishes. I go and I walk our dogs, and I often have ideas, and I come back and I got to get them down. These activities, the incubation phase, is as I'm learning stuff, I'm thinking about, it's rumbling around up there. So notice Keith Sawyer, who has I think one of the best kind of Bibles of creativity that summarizes much of the research. I love his focus. He talks about the need to help our students focus on finding problems. And then his worry, Mr. Nolan, my two there, that too often our discussion of creativity is focused on the problem solving, but we need to allow kids to be involved as well in problem finding. That allowing kids to explore ideas, not just to solve, but to think of what issues, if we could resolve this, how might that help? And problem finding as well as problem solving. So notice the last slide, there's a key word in the incubation was the unconscious. This is the time to muck about and think and do other things, and things jump into your head. The illumination phase is more conscious. This is where we start bringing particular strategies to work, to generate ideas, that we start weighing ideas. By the way, you'll notice that the illumination phase, and a very, very important piece of the illumination phase is the generation of lots and lots of ideas. And here, and this is often contrary to the work I do in critical thinking, you do not want criteria at this phase, because criteria often constrains or inhibits the fluency of ideas and the flexibility, because if it doesn't meet our criteria, we reject it. So in the illumination phase, we need to give kids space just to come up with wild and crazy and wacky ideas and just generate lots and lots and lots of ideas. So this is that phase where let's generate. By the way, the bottom statement I should explain, brainstorming has been found, I'll give you the caveat in a moment, that actually causes some students to shut down because it creates social stress. So when we say to our kids, turn to one other partner and share an idea, there's an expectation that they have an idea worthy of sharing. And for some kids, that causes them to shut down and creates anxiety. The research suggests if we're going to employ brainstorming, kids need time first to reflect on their own, to think on their own. They need time for a bit of personal processing as opposed to being immediately put on the spot. So just something to think about. And the verification phase. This is the final phase where we've now, we've been learning about something, we've been mucking about, we've been playing with things, we've generated a whole pile of ideas, but they're not all good ideas. So the verification, now I do need criteria. So notice here, we bring criteria back in. We're going to comment on this again shortly. This is where we move from, can you come up with interesting ideas? Can you recognize useful ideas? This is what, by the way, this is why earlier when I said critical and creative have to play together, because if all you do is generate ideas, but you never are able to sort useful from not useful, then you just get overwhelmed with ideas, but you don't know what to do with them. If you have an inability to generate new ideas, you're also stuck. So we want to look at how we useful idea absolutely is key. But by the way, we don't put that useful in too soon because then kids go, well, that's a dumb idea, that won't work, and they prematurely start to filter. We want to get lots of ideas on the table, let them percolate, and then think through. So I want to shift to, that was a very kind of quick introductory piece. I want to get to this piece, so how do we create the conditions? And I want you to pick one of these. I'll give you a minute, so I'll stop talking, have a sip of water. Here are four possible tasks that we could do with kids, and I've tried to put across grades, across subjects. If you were to think about these, would these create opportunities for creativity? So the first one is, here's a clock that tells time using mathematical representations. What if students' challenge was to create another clock but using different representations? What if they had to bring a story to life and tell me an interesting story? What if they had to create a giant slide for what would be the best slide? And my last one is inspired by the movie Martians, where when Matt Damon's character realizes he's stranded on Mars, he says he's going to have to science the blank out of this. And I just twisted that a bit, thinking of grade 10 civics, and said, okay, and if you put a colony in Mars, you're going to have to civics the blank out of this. What if civics were taught with kids exploring, if you had a chance to set up a new form of government on Mars, what ideas would you borrow from the Canadian government? What ideas would you reject? How could we use the Mars colony as a vehicle to engage kids in thinking about effective government, what's working and what's not? By the way, thanks for that suggestion, Catherine. And I love the fact that John Spencer talks about the idea of launch, because that's going to come up in a bit. So I'm going to just touch on, if we're going to get at that powerful learning that I had in the center of my diagram, I'm going to suggest a few things as we move into the more concrete. We have to allow kids time to live with the challenge. We're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment, but I think far too often in schools, our tasks lie far too late in the learning. They tend to be proof that you've learned. We teach stuff, then we give kids a task, and they have a few days to complete the task or less, and we use it to prove they've learned. I think we've got it, as long as you're doing that, we've got it backwards. If you remember back to those phases of creativity, they need that incubation time. That means the invitation to think and innovate and create should launch the learning, not wrap up the learning. And kids have to be allowed to fail forward, that they have to be allowed to say, that didn't work, I need to solve it. And when our assessments lie late in our units, you take away the opportunity to fail forward in a safe way. That the climate we create has to embrace the unusual. We have to allow kids to speculate and wonder in ways that are unique and different. We have to value the learning through multiple paths. Okay, I'll come back to that. And let me just comment on the collective genius. As I said to you earlier, everything we do is derivative from others' ideas, but we also know the best ideas come when we put our heads together. One of the myths in Western culture is we tend to focus on individuals, the Michelangelos, the Da Vinci's, the Galileos. You'll notice we tend to put our focus on the individual, but they all existed in a milieu, in a climate where they were sharing and kicking around ideas and discussing. We tend to have a need in Western culture to identify the one individual, yet I would argue it's probably much more realistic to think about the environment in which they were living that created that. And we need to create our classrooms not as competitive spaces, but as collaborative spaces where kids build off ideas. Failing forward. Failing forward is this notion that it's okay that failure or setbacks might be a better word. Well, yeah, they're stepping stones to success. Exactly. By the way, many teachers I encounter are in agreement with kids need to be allowed to fail. But when I point out that your assignment you gave in the last few days of the unit, kids do not want to fail with the unit coming to an end. If we're going to allow kids to fail forward, then they have to be given the task. Notice my question about Groot was asked the first day. And if kids, as they work through the unit, had initially said he's mostly plant, and through their learning decided, you know what, I think he's actually more animal, they're allowed to change their mind without risk. I want kids to design something the first day and then test it and realize it doesn't work and have to learn the physics or have to learn the science behind getting it to work. So it's that, Alexis, great point, that you don't give up. But again, I'm going to say to you, when our tasks lie at the end of the units, we undermine kids' ability to develop that perseverance and that fail forward. The other piece, if you want kids to think creatively, Bruce Nussbaum, and it was in the description of the session, used the phrase tools, not light bulbs. And what he meant by that is, again, one of the big myths in creativity is that creative geniuses have this lightning bolt that comes out of the sky and strikes them, and they suddenly have this great idea. It's just not true. If you want kids to be creative, we need to nurture the intellectual tools that will allow them to be successful at that. So part of that is how do we nurture habits like curiosity, empathy, perseverance? How do we teach them strategies? Children can think they're not creative. Well, how do I give them strategies that help unlock their creativity? Making sure they build background knowledge, and we'll talk about the criteria. So, and lastly, we have to shift, and I'm glad the province right now is going through a phase of re-looking at assessment. And my argument around creativity, at least, and I would say in general, is that we really need to shift the culture of assessment in schools from where kids feel it's like an inquisition, where they hand work in and hold their breath and wait to be judged by the teacher, to this collaborative search for excellence, where the teacher and the student are working through the teacher coaching and using a process. And some of us, you'll see in my second point here talking about a thought book, and some of you have been in sessions with me before, certainly on the inquiry, know that we have this idea of a thought book. I'm not a big fan of metacognition at the end. I don't think that having kids reflect back on the learning when it's over, I'm not sure is as powerful as we need it to be. I want metacognition to be in the moment. I want them to think, okay, I thought this about Groot, but today I learned this. I'm thinking now about my answer, and I think I need to refine it. We use 3 words with kids. As you learn, I want you to think about your answer, and I want you to decide if today's learning affirmed, caused you to refine or revise, or extended your thinking. So if I was doing a lesson on Groot, if I can keep using him as an example, what was affirmed for you? You told me yesterday that you thought he was mostly plant. Did today's lesson tend to affirm or confirm for you that that is in fact the case? Do you have better evidence to support your position? Or did it cause you to dial it back a little bit? You know, I said mostly plant, but I'm thinking now maybe a little less. Or it's pushed my thinking in another way. Getting kids to be reflective as they're doing the learning, not at the end of learning, because then it has value and meaning to them. So this is where I start digging into the optimal conditions. So we'll start moving there now. What I've identified are what I would call 5 keys that create the conditions for creativity to flourish in our classrooms. And the first one I've kind of talked about already, and that's the recognition of creativity as quality thinking. The recognition that creativity is part of, along with critical and creative, part of creating rich quality thinking in our classrooms. So I'm going to just touch on that for a moment. Those of you who have been to either Session Mine or others in TC Squared may recognize this framework. Time. I'm going to address time. I think that we had up there. This is the framework we use in the Critical Thinking Consortium. Here I've just tweaked it for creativity. If you want creativity to flourish in your classroom, we have to create a community where we're sharing, where the bizarre is embraced and tolerated, where the unusual. I love telling the story of Jim Carrey, the comedian, who grew up in Newmarket and went to high school, I believe, in the Burlington area. And I can just imagine as a grade 7, 8 student, he'd be a handful. And the story he tells is his grade, I think, 7 teacher used to tell the children if they worked hard and got all their work done, Jim could take the last 10 minutes of class and entertain them. And I just thought, what a wonderful, that you have someone as zany as Jim Carrey in your class. Do you try to clamp down on them, or do you tap into it? Do you use it? Do you create the community? We need to create a space where kids aren't ridiculed for thinking differently, for testing their ideas. My second issue, we have to create opportunities for creativity. Have I framed my assessment? Have I framed the challenge I'm giving kids in a way that opens the door for them to be creative and to innovate? So part of it is not only do I allow for it, but I craft my tasks that invite it, and we'll talk about that in a moment. I want to go back for a moment to the conference I spoke of with Rex Young. And when Rex spoke, someone asked him at the end, said, "This is fascinating, so how do I do it?" He said, "I have no idea. I'm a neuroscientist, not a teacher." When I went up, I introduced the 5 intellectual tools, and in the end, he said, "That's what you need to do." The 5 intellectual tools, by the way. Oh, sorry. I'm just looking at Michelle. I think that's wonderful. To shift from failure. I'm sorry, to just deviate for a moment. Michelle's comment about an elitist word in failure. I've had people suggest, and I do kind of like this, we shouldn't talk in terms of failure, because not only is it elitist, it also has a certain finality to it for kids. If I had failed, that perhaps we should be talking about setbacks. That I've encountered a setback, but that's okay. Like setbacks may work better to help kids think about, so how am I going to overcome my setback? Whereas you'll notice the term failure seems to suggest a little bit more that effort failed, time to move past it. So I think there's some merit in your thought about maybe failure, we should be rethinking its use. Yeah, bump in the road, that kind of thing. Now I want to go back to what really kind of light bulb went off for me as I've been reading on the neuroscience. If you think about the conditions I mentioned earlier, they're the exact same intellectual tools you need for critical thinking. If you're going to think critically, you need some background. You need criteria to help decide are these ideas worthwhile. You need to understand the language of the question, the task. You need strategies to generate ideas, and you need the habits. The same tools. The beauty for me is if I understand how to nurture critical thinking, it's very easy to just tweak that for creativity. I'm going to try to model that. So here's a picture of the Aztecs. This is a Diego Rivera painting. And it's the city of Tenochtitlan, which is now Mexico City. And if I ask students to create an entertaining story inspired by this picture, so I put this picture up, I want you to write a story in my language arts class and in a history class. Tell me a story that is inspired by this picture. And I want you to watch how much more successful would students be if they had some background knowledge to understand that what they're seeing in the background are actually canals. This is a shallow lake, and Tenochtitlan was built on a series of canals. And in the background, you know, the food was grown on some things called chiampas, and you know, they know a little bit about the materials and the temples. And if we taught a little bit, imagine how that might help their story. How are we going to assess their story? How effective it is? What's our criteria for a well-written story? Are there terms students need to understand to be able to do this? What thinking strategies might help them generate more ideas? We'll come to that in a moment. What habits? Attention to detail, open-mindedness, curiosity, these are habits. If I nurture these tools, the chances of my students writing an effective story are going to be enhanced rather than me just putting up the picture. And by the way, if I just put up the picture and I say, write me a creative story, all I'm going to do is sort my kids into those who are confident in creativity and those who aren't. I need to build the intellectual tools so all my kids can engage. Now, opportunity. I'm going to be pausing in a moment. I want to show you, same image. What if I asked, let me come back to that in just a moment. What if I tweaked my picture? I want you to create an entertaining story inspired by this image, but it must be realistic. So it's going to be a piece of historical fiction that has to draw on accurate history and relevant and important history. Notice my criteria emerging. That's my first group. My second group has to create an entertaining story that's magical. I want an element of fantasy in your story. When you bring this picture to life, you'll integrate history, but you'll also integrate an element of fantasy. Another group, yours is to be more comedic. We should bring this picture to life, but this one, your story, is to be told in a humorous or funny way. My last group, yours is to be dramatic. So all of you need to draw on accurate historical information as we unpack the picture, but some will tell me a comedic story, some a dramatic story, some will integrate fantasy, and so on. Absolutely, we can let students choose whichever they want. What I want to show you, though, is the research into creativity shows the power of constraints. If I said just write me any old story, some kids can feel overwhelmed. By the way, notice, Alexis, how you pointed out how it changes the direction of the story. And by just saying to kids, your story can be realistic, magical, funny, dramatic, I'm putting some constraints in place. The research is showing us too many constraints will shut down, but too few constraints don't push the thinking. So we try to aim for that sweet spot where we put some constraints in place. I want you to tell a story, but you have to tell it in one of these ways. How are you going to frame your story? And it helps to generate the ideas. So just a little tweak on a story that constrains students in terms of thinking, which pushes thinking, enriches their thinking a little bit. Let's just pause here, and I'd just love to get some thoughts from people so far. Like I saw earlier, someone said time is an issue. We're going to dig into some of these pieces. What are some of the issues? I'm very pleased to see some very positive comments, but I'd like to just pause and capture, this is sounding great, but. What's the but? And we have lots more to come, but what are some of the pieces that would prevent schools in general, you in particular, what would that be? What are the barriers that we face as teachers? So time is one that we've had. Okay. Thank you. All right, let's see if we can address some of these. Ryan, do you have any thoughts on why students might be resistant? And Mike, in what way do you think the curriculum gets in the way? Okay, Ryan. Yeah, I have heard. You know, some students just tell me I just want to do it the easy way. Okay. Yeah. We'll try to touch on a few of these things. I wanted to add about, you know, with lots of talk these days around STEM and STEAM, looking at adding a design lens. So I'm looking at the key attributes of design thinking tasks. That design tasks, students have to understand the challenge, be able to self-regulate. It should be authentic. The whole idea is more authentic. That the launches initiate the thinking. The second one from the bottom I want to point out, I hadn't thought of this. I was doing a talk at a Design Institute in the US, and some of the engineers there said, well, you know, all design thinking begins with empathy. And I found myself going, I didn't really think about that. And they said, well, of course, if you're designing a set of headphones, you have to think about who the end user will be. Will are they comfortable for the end user? Do they look like something you want to wear? That you don't design for yourself. You try to understand others. In fact, if you get a chance, see if you can Google sometime Ford Motor Company's empathy suit. They've developed a suit. They realize that many of their engineers are kind of 30-something engineers and designing cars for an aging baby boom population. So they created an empathy suit where they put on glasses, kind of with thick lenses that blur their vision a bit, gloves that cause their hands to shake a bit, weights on their feet, and so on. And then they have to design a car as if you're an elderly person. How would you design your car? So anyway, I think that this idea that all creativity and certainly all design thinking is, well, who am I designing for, and will this meet their needs, which is kind of neat. Anyway, I wanted to just show you. I've been thinking about, so how do I come up with ideas that, when I try to generate ideas that would add a design lens and an opportunity for innovation, I call these frames for creativity. And essentially, I could cluster most things I do into 6. That I'm going to invite kids to create. You're going to design something useful within a subject area. I could ask you to recreate. You have to rework something for a new purpose or new context. That you're going to curate. What I mean by that is you're going to gather for an anthology, for an art exhibit, for a museum display, digital collections, and you're going to gather and sort and decide which ones to keep and how you'll display them. You're going to write with purpose. So you're going to write for an audience and I think we do a lot of this in our writing programs. You're going to perform, or you're going to imagine differently. And the last one, the picture you see there, is the printing press. And I put that in because Gutenberg lived in a wine region in France, and he didn't actually invent a new machine. He invented a new machine by taking 2 existing things. He took a wine press and movable type, and he put them together and said, oh, a printing press is born. It is the reimagining of existing inventions used to solve a new twist in an old way or a new way. So this is what I want to show you here, and that's what this one's about. I'm trying to show you that I want to always move traditional tasks which don't involve a lot of thinking. So what are the needs of a specific animal, third one down, and how are their needs met in their habitat? That's a retrieval question. I can look it up. I can write you an answer, but I don't have to make any judgments. I can turn that into design a habitat for a classroom pet, which involves thinking. Identify historical characters' role and significance in history. It's in the textbook. Was the historical character an effective leader? judgment. Notice my last column is, but what if I tweak even the critical thinking and put a design lens onto it? So instead of, let's debate whether the character was effective as a leader, how about you have to, in the role of a modern day journalist, you're going to interview the character who will come in two students. One will be a modern day journalist, the other will come in role as the historical character, and they'll be interviewed on, on a set like that. So notice what I'm doing with all of these is the middle box, they all invite critical thinking. They just don't necessarily invite design thinking. So on the right, I'm saying, no, let's push this a little further and add the design thinking. I'll just show you one more, then we'll pause for your ideas. By the way, I had to show you this. This was a kindergarten example where the kindergarten children had a design mitten challenge. And I want you to think of the things we've been talking about tonight. So kindergarten class, they had design mittens. Something popped up on my screen there. Let me try that again. Sorry, let's move that out of the way. They were given criteria. The mittens you design have to keep your hands warm, keep your hands dry, look fancy, and be comfortable. The students then had a planning board, and they had to be able to justify the material. So they were given a number of materials, and they had to think about what would you use. So here are their mitten planning boards. And notice the criteria the children would identify. I want mine to be fancy and warm, dry and warm. And they would have to talk about why they chose the materials they chose to meet the criteria. So this has a critical element. There is criteria to guide them in the decision, but it's a highly creative, design-oriented task for kindergarten children. Okay. So I thought this was just a lovely example. So I want to just pause on this for a moment. I started to, in fact, this I have as a Word document, and I'm not sure why these things keep popping up. So I tried just in every subject area. I'm going to bounce back and forth for just a moment. So across different subjects, take the create, recreate, curate, write for purpose, perform, imagine differently, and give you an example in all subject areas, or a variety of subject areas. And then leave a space. And I'm thinking about this like if I was in a department meeting working with a planning partner. Here's a sample across the sex. Here's a space. Let's see if we can come up with our own. And I'm trying to show, and Melanie, thanks for that. Yes, kindergarten. Like I think this has to become an embedded way. But also notice what I'm trying to say, and creativity and innovation should be in English, science, social studies, mathematics. We need to move creativity from being, well, that's what the arts do, to say, well, no, it's what kids should be invited to in all subjects and at all grades. I'm just going to pause here for a moment and have you look at it. And if you could post a few thoughts of your own in the window, I'll leave it here and then I'll go to the next page in a moment, but give me a chance to read these. And if you could just comment on there's some that you could say, oh, I want to know more about this one. Oh, I like this, I'm going to use this. Or I want to add in that blank spot, here's something I would add. Okay, so just give you a few minutes to review, identify something you might be able to use, something you would modify, or something you could add. There's a couple of questions that have come up, and while you're reading these, I'll comment and then I'll go to the next. One of the questions, I think when possible, I would offer students a variety of options to consider. There may be times in which, and let me just give you an example. If I'm working on, if writing is my learning goal, if writing is my focus, then I'm not going to say to kids, you can do a dramatic performance and not write. If I always say to kids, you can pick what you want to do, I may have children who never want to write, and I just don't develop their writing. So I think this is an instructional call I have to make. There are times in which if I want to focus on creativity and innovation, and any one of these without my learning goal, I'd prefer to allow kids to have choice. But I also want to recognize there are times in which I need to see that you're, I want you to read deeply. I might do the curate because I want you to read and analyze and decide which should go in our anthology and be able to defend your choice. I might target that. If I want to see a performance, I want to see oral communication, I might have a performance-based one. So remember, in our assessment, we're to gather a variety of pieces of evidence. So now, by the way, I could give lots of choice, but then when students who avoided writing for the first 2 or 3 tasks in my course want to avoid it again, I might say, well, I think this time I'd like to see you pick something that involves more writing. So I'm just being cognizant of the need to gather evidence of students' ability to communicate in a variety of mediums. The other issue I'm just reading some of the comments. The other question was about criteria, and I was just saying in my class today, I'm just pulling this up so you can read these ones now, that again, there isn't a single answer to when to, where the criteria comes from. So what I would suggest to you is sometimes we co-construct criteria, and the ministry is big on pushing co-constructing criteria. Any of you who have done that know it takes time, and if you have critical thinking routinely in your class, which means you're routinely stopping to co-construct criteria, you're probably going to find you're getting bogged down and not getting through your curriculum. So sometimes I think we have to make instructional choices. Sometimes I prefer to co-construct understanding. What I mean by that is sometimes I might go in, especially with younger grades, and present my criteria and spend 10 or 15 minutes unpacking what each of those criteria mean, making sure students understand, so we co-construct our understanding, as opposed to having kids generate the words but not the understanding. And sometimes I'm going to straight up present the criteria because I need to get you into this task. So there may be some days when I go in and I say up front, like you saw with the mitten challenge, these are the criteria we're going to use. I want to get you into the planning. So I think that there's not one way that we construct criteria, and be careful you don't allow it to get you bogged down. I saw someone earlier post a question on RAFs. I think I just saw RAFs and Melanie's name attached to it. So performance tasks or performance specs. Those are great questions. The response to any of the questions that you have could be done in a written task. I want you to write a letter to persuade a politician of this, so now it becomes a right for purpose and audience. It could be a design to specs, design an ad that would convey this message. It could be a perform to specs where you present a speech. So I think there are multiple. I want to add, you'll notice RAFs is, if you look at social studies, the 4th column over, we actually add an S. And so for those of you who aren't familiar so most literacy sources use RAFT, as Melanie is listed here, role, audience, format, topic. So the idea is you would say to students, in the role of this character, writing to this audience, character, group of people, whatever it might be, in the form of a news editorial, a news report, a letter, and so on. I want you to, and writing about this topic. We call it RAFs, and you'll notice we add at the end, and you see it on, I'll tape it here as well, a strong verb or strong message. And this is what really pushes the thinking. So let me give you an example. I want you in the, you're writing a very common grade 10 task, write a letter home from the trenches. Okay, so in the role of a soldier in World War I, you're writing to your family, that's your audience. The format is a letter, and the topic is life on the battlefield. when you add strong verb or message, is your letter intended to assure them that you're okay? So my strong verb is assure. Is it to complain? Is it to convince? Is it to, so when kids have to take a position, then you have to look at, so how are you using language to convey that? Imagine if that World War I soldier wasn't writing, instead of writing to their spouse, they're writing to a politician, a prime minister, a premier. You're still writing a letter, but it's now a more formal letter, official letter. Are you thanking them for the support? Are you complaining about their lack of support? Are you, so when kids add, yes, Heather, so when we add that strong verb or message, it more clearly clarifies for the kids the purpose behind the letter, which allows me now to look at the descriptive language. So if your intent was to persuade, did you use language that was designed to persuade? If it was to convince, what language would you use? So I find RAFs with the S is a more powerful. By the way, for those of you, well, for all of us, one of the things I think we miss an opportunity is imagine using RAFs in reverse as a reading strategy. Imagine if I gave kids an article from a newspaper, a primary document, and I used RAFs and I said, your first job is to look at who wrote this and what role were they writing this. Was this a citizen? Was it a letter from a politician? Is it a letter from the trenches? Who's writing it? Who are they writing it for? And what will that tell us? As you read it, think about who they were trying to write to. What does that tell us? Is this a political cartoon, an editorial, a letter, an official letter? When you think about the format, it'll tell you how you should read it. What's the topic you're reading about? Now think about getting kids to watch for language use that will give you clues as to whether or not the person writing this was praising, complaining. RAFs in reverse as a reading structure can be a powerful way for kids to read more closely and to read for meaning. Anyway, as I said, this is a Word document. I'm happy to share. It's just trying to take not just critical thinking, but add that design lens to it in ways that invite kids to come up. And then I think it allows us to come up with more interesting, more authentic assignments for kids. So if you go back to my original one here, and you think about the frames, so remember my frames are create, recreate, curate, write for purpose, perform, imagine differently. So what would the first one with the clock be? I've given you a clock, but you have to create a new one. Which of those? So I should clarify. If you have a thought, jot it in the window. Yeah, that's a recreate. You have to. I've given you the idea, but you have to come up with new, interesting ways to use. If we have the kids writing a story, what's that one? So tell an interesting, by the way, I wasn't clear on that. Tell an interesting story could be a perform, right? If I want kids to tell it verbally, to put on a skit, to bring this, step into the picture and bring this picture to life, what happens next, it could be a write for audience. It could be a perform for audience. Designing the potato sack race is clearly, it's a create. And design the best form of governance could be a create or a recreate because we have existing forms we'll play with. So just, you can see them in there. I want to spend a little bit of time on the fluency. I said to you one of the keys in creativity, and this is one of the kind of popular theories in creativity research. It's called BVSR. It stands for blind variation, selective retention. And we'll get into this in a sec. BVSR actually comes out of kind of evolutionary biology ideas. You'll notice the law, and it sounds nice and fancy, the greater the heterogeneity and volume of trials, the greater the chance of productive innovation. Essentially what that's saying, the more ideas kids can generate, the better chance they have of actually coming up with a useful idea. Okay, so key and blind variation, phase one of BVSR. The more ideas we can generate, the better chance we have of coming up with a useful idea. I said to you earlier, blind variation is best under lowered cognitive control. We want to not have criteria. If you have kids in groups and they're telling each other that's a bad idea, that's dumb, that won't work, I want you to know you are undermining creativity. So you need, Jennifer, great point, the variation. This is why collaboration matters, why allowing kids to generate all the ideas they can with no barriers. And notice it can be spontaneous or deliberative. And what we mean by that, I could be just out for recess and I got a cool idea and I come in and I quickly jot it down. So sometimes ideas pop into our heads when we're doing other things. Sometimes we use strategies that help generate them. But we need to give space for both. And they thrive in collaborative environments where we build off each other. I throw out an idea, you throw out an idea. We build off each other's ideas. So here's a couple of things that we know help enhance blind variation. So one is just breaking the conventional process by which you might do things in class, just doing things in a reverse order, doing things differently, just to see the world differently by breaking out of routines. Allowing for distractions, taking a break. Again, my guess is many of you at some point in life have tried to solve a problem, you've gotten stuck, you stop worrying about it, you go do some dishes, you go do something else, and suddenly an idea hits you. This is very, very, remember my first question today, the schools inhibit. Here's one of our great challenges. How do we give kids space to walk away from their task and just let it percolate for a while? And I'm going to tell you, you can't. And great point, Melanie. Some of the best ideas, middle of the night, when you're not trying to think of it. You can never do this with kids as long as we make our tasks the end of learning. So this is kind of my mantra running through this evening. If your rich task is the result or the end of learning, you can never get to this point where they can walk away and just think for a while. I need to plant it up front so kids are thinking about it. We'll come back to this later. They go home, ideas generate. This next suggestion, think of problems far away in space or time. Why? If I said to you, let's think of like the best trip ever. If you could just plan the most amazing vacation or trip, what would it be? If you say, I want you to come up with the most amazing trip for your family, you'd right away put a limit in place, because now I have to think about, well, who's in my family and what are their needs and what are their limitations, and already I've started to filter. So you need to say, if you could plan the best vacation for somebody you've never met, it's just going to be an amazing vacation. Don't worry about the details of what would your vacation be. So when you want kids to solve a problem, we want to leave it open at the beginning. Remember, this is the generation phase. And allow kids just to work on mundane tasks. I'm just going to jump by this. We mentioned this piece. I'm watching my time. I want to show you some specific strategies, going back to this idea we need to give kids tools. And so when we say tools, not light bulbs, what we mean is kids who think they just can't think critically, we need to get, by the way, I don't think as teachers we would be content with a student saying, well, I'm just not a good writer. So we'd say, yeah, you're right. So, I'll just give you C's and you'll just never do well. We would look for ways to help them improve their writing. We would give them strategies. A child who struggles on testing, we try to give them strategies. In mathematics, creativity should be exactly the same. If you are not by nature creative, then what strategies can I use to unlock your creativity? So here's a few that you can try out tomorrow in your class. One is this idea of using superheroes, where students select a superhero, and I've just put 3 up. You can win with a dozen. They pick whatever superhero they want, and you ask them to think about how this superhero would use their superpowers to solve a challenge. So here's the challenge we have. How would pick a superhero and think about what they would do? Now, using that as a springboard, how might that give you some ideas for something you could do, either to add to your story, to propose a solution? Again, notice the differentiation. Just let kids pick from a range of superheroes. If they're not familiar, I just give them a little bit of detail about them, and the kids start to generate ideas. Remember, we're beginning with there are no bad ideas. Let's just generate. Now we'll sort through later. Toppling is another strategy. So toppling is when kids have to pick a word, and then they have to think of another word, but notice as they move along, the new word has to have a different kind of connection. So in this one, I started with stocks. And stocks make me think of investment. And I could invest time. And, oh, you tell time with a watch. Oh, a watch would make a good gift. I could buy jewelry. You know, so I started thinking about stocks, and I ended up thinking about what jewelry I might get someone for their birthday. The idea is to try to get the brain to make a lateral move, because our brains tend to think in linear patterns, that A leads to B leads to C. What we're doing here is saying, I want you to think about A to B, but then I want you to jump not to C, but to something else. And so we start making these moves, and you watch for useful ideas. So here's an example using toppling to get kids to come up with a story about a zoo. By the way, this strategy, I'm going to marry to it. I just want to show you this. Have any of you used, I'll put it up as an acronym first, picture word inductive model? Have any of you are familiar with? So I'm seeing some notes come up. All right, let me explain it to you. By the way, do any of you teach ELL learners? Okay, any of you teaching fairly young children? FSL? Perfect. Okay, let me show you. By the way, I'm just going to change my picture. I want you to remember this picture I would be using at a primary level. In a high school science, I'm going to pick the appropriate picture. Earlier, I had an Aztec picture, so I can vary my picture. The beauty of this strategy is every child can participate. So what you would do with a picture like this is you would invite children to come, you'd project this picture either on a smart board or interactive board, or you just project this and give them sticky notes. And you invite children to come up and label everything they can find on the picture. And by the way, I don't care if you know the correct word. I don't even care if you know the word in English, or if I'm teaching French, if you don't know the French word. You're going to come up and you're going to either circle or place your sticky note right on top of something that you've noticed. Let's just try this out a little bit. Could you just type in things that you know? If you were a student and I said, come up and label everything you see in the picture. Go. What would kids label? I see a giraffe. Great. By the way, I want you to imagine if I don't know the English word for giraffe, I put it in my native language. I see the sky, beautiful, ice cream vendor, penguins, trees, lions. I just want to go, oh my, I don't think we had a bear. Oh, blue, wonderful, umbrellas, look at the ideas. So kids will be posting these. Keep in mind, if I don't know the correct word, I don't worry about it. I put a label. If I don't know the word, let's say my original language is Farsi and I don't know the English word, I put it in Farsi. The teacher now will say, oh, well in English we would say, and I'll teach you the English word in context. So step one, we call this shaking out. Okay? Step one, we shake out the student's vocab. What do kids already know? Okay? Step two, on the arrows that you're noticing around the picture, I've identified words, key vocabulary for my lesson that I know are important. Okay? So I'm going to reveal, after kids have exhausted all their ideas, I reveal things that I've seen. Laughter, elephants, friendship, danger, habitat, spots, stripes, family, school. Now, by the way, you'll notice in my learn, if my goal is to introduce more descriptive language, verbs, adverbs, I can think about parts of speech that I might want to focus on. So I can target the language. Now, I might say to kids, you know, good job, you guys labeled the elephants and so did I, but I also saw laughter. I love when somebody said blue. You know, people might notice I put cool. I think that ice would be cool. So now on our picture, we've got 15 words the kids generated, another 10 that I've identified. And our next step is we ask the kids, if you could cluster these, I want you to put these into 3 groups. How would you cluster them? By the way, you can do an open sort or a closed sort. I could say to kids in grade 1 or 2, let's say grade 1, I want you to cluster living and non-living, and I connect it to my science. I might ask kids, I want you to do nouns and verbs. I might do descriptive language verses. So I can do a closed sort, or I can have kids sort and have them label their sort. Once we've grouped our words, labeled the cluster, could you write me a sentence about this picture that uses one word from the 3 different clusters? So notice, by the way, if you go back to my Aztec picture, I want you to write a story. I could do this activity after their first draft of the story and then say, what new language, what new descriptive terms might you add to your story to make it even more engaging, more interesting? What I love about this strategy is every child can participate because it's a visual. They can all add to it. I can teach language in context. And it leads then kids to telling me a story. Bring this picture to life. Now, based on this, if this picture came to life, tell me the story. Tell me a story about what would happen. So that's a way, again, to build vocab. By the way, you'll notice from my talk, I'm using a picture inductive model to build background knowledge in terms of language, but I'm also using it to enrich the creative stories kids can tell. By the way, I'm trying to put a range in across subjects. I talked to you earlier about rafts. This is a variation of using rafts. So you can see here, in the role of self, sorry, can we do the same activity in math? Absolutely. Getting kids, especially, maybe not especially, asking kids all the shapes, all the mathematical terms you could identify. I can see a trapezoid here. I can see this here. Can you tell me a math story? Can you integrate math as by adjectives? So I think we can do the same thing. Here, in the role of self, it's a diary entry, so I'm writing to myself, and it's about my visit to the zoo. And the strong verb is, I had fun. So if you take a look at what I wrote, on Saturday we went to the zoo. We saw monkeys, giraffes, and bears. Later in the afternoon we had ice cream. Before we left we went to the gift shop and I bought a toy. Then we went home and I went to bed. Now, remember, I'm writing in my diary to myself about my visit to the zoo, and I want to capture how much fun I had. Can you tell I had fun? I'm going to assume yes. What would help it be clear that I had fun? What's missing from the writing that's having many of you say, I can't really tell you you had fun here? Yeah, there's no adjectives, no descriptive language, right? Now imagine, so what I do, and sorry, because I'm doing this in this way, the window that you see to the bottom right, I hide words behind it. You can do it in an envelope and so on. And we pull words out. Here's sampling words. And we're going to take a word and we give kids 2 criteria. It has to fit as a part of speech and it has to make sense. What part of speech is delicious? Great, thank you. Delicious is an adjective. Adjectives modify the noun. So I'm going to take delicious and I'm going to put it just before zoo. On Saturday, we went to the delicious zoo. Does that work as a part of speech? I'm just using my first criteria only. Could I put, on Saturday, we went to the delicious zoo? Does it work as a part of speech? Okay, why did I get a, oh yes, because it does work as a part of speech. I've used an adjective to modify a noun. It's the correct part of speech, but beautiful, Catherine. It's the correct part of speech, but it doesn't make sense where I've put it. So notice I have 2 criteria, and I'm trying to break them down for kids. On Saturday, we went to the delicious zoo. Correct part of speech, but it doesn't make sense in context. Could we find a better place? We had delicious ice cream. Does that work? And kids go back to the 2 criteria. Well, ice cream is a noun, and adjectives modify a noun, so yeah, it fits there. And yes, ice cream could be delicious. Notice what I'm doing is teaching grammar through a critically thoughtful approach. We saw large monkeys. Does that work? And by the way, kids might say, yeah, they could. They might have been big monkeys, or we saw large giraffes, which works better. I bought a strawberry toy. I bought, by the way, what about if I said, on Saturday we went to the boring zoo? Does it fit as a part of speech? Does it make sense? Now, Tara, I think you're partially right. It does make sense, except What am I trying to do in this writing? What was my strong verb? To show that I had fun. And to say I went to the boring zoo is contrary to what I said I was trying to do in my writing. On the other hand, if I had to go home to my boring bed, so this is getting kids to play with language. Am I using, is it grammatically correct? Does it make sense? Have I used it in the best place? By the way, this is getting either young children, or imagine this were beginning language learners in English, and French, and whatever subject. They're not going to write full paragraphs if they don't have a lot of language, but I can prime the pump by giving them a piece of writing that's not rich enough, and then we get them to enrich it by simply adding in a word. So it's manageable, and they can be creative in where they place the words.
Sorry to interrupt, Garfield, but it's 8:55, so we just have like a couple minutes left.
A couple minutes. And I have to show you a couple of my favorite strategies. Analogy, easy to use. This, you get kids to pick one of these. Now, in this case, I'm using learning because I'm working with educators. And you say, learning is like gardening. I want you to brainstorm, like, what does gardening make you think of? And because of our time, learning is like gardening. Well, gardening makes me think of growing things. It makes me think of planting seeds, of taking care of, and then they have to make connections. So how could that connect to learning? Learning is like whitewater rafting. It can be exciting, it can be dangerous, but we all pull together. Oh, that's kind of like our classroom. So what you're trying to do is to generate ideas that you wouldn't initially connect. Again, it's that lateral move where learning, or whatever it is, hard work and so on, connects. I want to talk, this is probably one of my favorite strategies, so I'm glad we're getting to this one. Synesthesia. Synesthesia is the wiring in the brain is crossed so that synesthetes, as they're called, connect different senses. So the color purple, or sorry, number 5 would be purple to someone who might have synesthesia, for example. So synesthesia is when colors, sounds, and so on, you associate with another sense. And we can use this to help kids. So notice here I put, and we'll try and do this quickly. If learning were a shape, could I get a few just to quickly jot down? If learning were a shape, what shape would it be? Okay, now as people say circle, you invite kids, can you explain why? Well, it never ends. Now, I love that someone said a blob. Why a blob? Why a straight line? Liquid mercury, love it. Look at the ideas emerging, right? What if learning were a color? What color is it? Sparkles, it's green, fire, it's beautiful. By the way, white. Many people say white. Why? Well, it's all the colors put together. It's the blank slate I can fill in. I had someone say learning is black. It's like a black hole. It absorbs. What does it sound like, smell like, taste like? I did this exercise with a group of grade 6 students who were creating an anti-bullying poster for their school. And watch how simple this was. I simply dropped learning and put in bullying. If bullying were a shape, what shape would bullying be? Kids said things like a triangle because it's got points and it hurts. A sea urchin, it's got a lot of points and it hurts. If bullying were a color, well, red, it's the pain. One boy said burgundy. Remember, 10-year-old. Bullying is burgundy because red is the color of the pain you feel and black is the isolation. And when you put the two together, you get burgundy. Wow, by the way, when the kids went and created their posters, everything about their poster was intentional. I'm going to use burgundy letters because this represents this. I'm going to integrate these shapes because they represent this. They start to make these connections where it's not my favorite color, or this could be funny. There are deeply thoughtful connections. By the way, think if you're doing the Underground Railroad, you're reading a novel. If freedom were a smell, what does it smell like? What does freedom taste like? What is fairness? What shape is fairness? What color is fairness? This is just a wonderfully rich way, and as a teacher, I simply swap out one word, and I've got a lesson ready to go tomorrow, and it will generate such rich, rich ideas for your kids, and then you ask them, how could you use that in your work? By the way, what I'm trying to model for you here is all kids can think creatively if we give them some strategies to do it. It's not enough just to say, here's a task, go do it. how do I unlock the creativity for kids? The verification phase, I'll just quickly touch on it. It's upregulating, it's adding the criteria, so kids have to select now of all the ideas. You can't use them all, we don't have time. Which ones are going to be most helpful in creating your poster, and so on. I'm going to just jump by a couple of pieces that perhaps we will do another session and we can come back to these. I did want to just, in 2 minutes if I could, this idea of productive failure or useful setbacks, I like the idea of shifting our thinking. I just want to touch on time. And key thing here, we have to give kids time to allow it to fail. I just love these quotes. After being cut from his basketball team, he went home and cried to himself. You may know this was Michael Jordan. Cut from her job as a news anchor, she wasn't fit for television, Oprah Winfrey. Fired from a newspaper for lacking imagination and no original ideas, Walt Disney. Grade 8 teacher told his parents there's no sense in going to high school. He had little chance of success. That was me, and there I am. So I'm just going to finish on this one, and I've been trying to stress this throughout. If we are serious about nurturing creativity with kids, we have to let them live with the problem. John Cleese said this, learn to live with the problem longer. You'll produce better work. Let kids muck about. Let them make mistakes. Let it percolate. Put the task up front as the invitation to learn. And I love this statement from Andrew Staunton from Pixar Films, his fail early, fail fast. His argument is to fail late in making a movie is you cost the movie Pixar Films, for example, millions of dollars to find out you've got a dud at the end. You want to find out early that this isn't working, so you have time to go back and think more deeply and change your thinking and innovate. I think we will always inhibit creativity and innovation in our schools as long as they're task-light. At the end of learning, they should be the purpose for doing the learning, and then let kids muck about. I have to stop there because we are out of time, unfortunately. But perhaps we'll follow up with some other, because there's so much we can explore in creativity, and it can be practical, and all kids can do it. So, sorry I did so much talking, but I hope there were pieces that were useful to you.
Thanks, Garfield. Definitely a great